Hey everyone, real quick, if you need a recap for season 2 of You, just hit the link in the top right corner. Now, season 3 picks up 7 months after Joe Goldberg and Love Quinn became parents. Hooray! Joe currently hates his life. He thinks Love is a complete psychopath, and the only reason he's really with her is because of the fact that she was pregnant. But they were told that they were pregnant with a baby girl. So you can imagine his surprise when a baby boy popped out. Henry 40 Quinn Goldberg, that Love tries to keep calling 40, and Joe has to keep reminding her his name is Henry. To make matters worse for Joe, his mother-in-law has gotten a condo 30 minutes away so she can pop in. But that ends up being kind of a blessing because parenthood hits Joe pretty hard. While they don't say it, it seems like the baby is suffering from colic. But what is known is Henry doesn't really take too fondly to Joe. Every time Joe picks him up or tries to pick him up, Henry starts crying. Dottie Shaman had told her that Henry was 40 reincarnated, so if that is truly the case, then the crying would make sense. But they're just new parents, sleep-deprived, irritable, love having it worse than Joe. And this new plastic suburban life that he's living in Madre Linda isn't really suiting him too well. They don't have a used bookstore, so he's forced to take his operation to the internet. All the profits he sends to Ellie whenever he hears from her. But the new life has them in the house a lot. They don't really get out much, and when they do, it's usually just to pick up a latte. One of the reasons why is because every time they do venture out, Henry ends up crying. One particular day, they're doing that very thing, trying to grab a latte. Henry starts crying. And a local mom who's an influencer, they call those momfluencers, named Sherry Conrad, walks over. She's got a very successful blog/podcast, and she has twins. And she seems about as fake as they come, but she's well aware of who Joe and Love and even Henry is. Madre Linda's kind of a small community, so word travels fast when new people move in. And she happens to be kind of the queen bee. She tells Love, we've got to grab coffee together. I can share all my secrets. But they don't really take it as a compliment. It sounds more condescending in a way. Love feels like she was just called a bad mother in public. On days like this, though, Joe has to remind himself of the mission in hand of being a good husband, being a good father, and that's tough to do with his smoking hot neighbor, Natalie, right next door. As they're walking in the house, they end up seeing Natalie grabbing the mail, but Joe takes a lot longer of a look than most would. And it's not like Natalie isn't staring back. As soon as they step in the house, Love starts kind of ripping Natalie for being cold, not giving her a housewarming gift or a baby gift when Henry was due, and Joe just agrees, yeah, she seems a little weird. Joe then goes to pick up Henry, but Henry starts crying. Love goes and picks him up and says, the babies can tell when your heart's not in it, Joe. And that's because Joe's heart isn't really in it. His heart is more next door. And when he sees Natalie leaving, he ends up creating an excuse to leave the house and follow her. And he follows her to the grocery store where, while she's inside, he's having a fantasy about her coming in the car and them getting it on. So it's pretty embarrassing when he gets a knock at the window as he's jerking off, and it's the neighbor. She tells him, you've got to be so underslept. I hear your baby crying all the time. It's kind of understandable why you'd be sleeping in your car in a grocery store parking lot, but I wanted to be a nice neighbor and save you a trip, so she throws him some diapers. But then she gives him a box of condoms, saying that the rumors about how women can't get pregnant while they're breastfeeding aren't true, so don't fall for it. And that gesture has Joe thinking that maybe she's flirting with him. As much as Joe wants to follow this, he knows he can't. He can't just walk out of Love's life because she has his child. He's also well aware he's kind of made some mistakes in his life, but that's not going to stop him from trying to figure out who exactly Natalie is. And just a quick deep dive in the internet, he finds out that she's a local realtor who's really good at her job. She left college early when she met her husband, who's a tech entrepreneur named Matthew. But he needs to know who she is in the real life. He gets that opportunity when Love goes to a spin class. So he grabs Henry, puts him in the car, and ends up following Natalie throughout the day. And that actually takes him to a local library where Natalie walks in, and now Joe is smitten hard. Joe ends up following her in there, trying to look inconspicuous. But he doesn't do a really good job. When Natalie heads to the counter to check out some books, he gets closer because he wants to see what books she's checking out. And a lot of the books she's checking out have been turned into movies. Who knew The Fast and the Furious was originally a book? But as he's trying to creep, Henry starts crying. It draws attention, and that's when Natalie turns around, sees Joe, and gives him a wave. He then walks up to the counter, and the librarian says, are you going to chase after her, or could I actually help you with something? And Joe gets an application for a library card. She tells Joe that they have a great kids section, but then also hands him a book and says, here, Natalie picked this out. And it's Tender is the Night by F. Scott Fitzgerald. So now Joe definitely is convinced that she is flirting with him. I mean, after all, she knew the whole time that he was following her. Joe then heads home and starts reading the book. Love tried to head home after her spin class, but she ran into Sherry. Sherry introduces Love to her two friends, Kiki and Andrew, and they start talking about how hard it is to get the baby weight off, but then they invite Love out to grab a latte. And they start doing the whole rich people with problems thing, complaining about their nannies. Sherry starts talking about her blog, humble bragging a bit. Love tells her that she's never read it. Sherry then asks Love what she does for work, and Love tells her that she's trained as a chef, but after Henry was born, she hasn't really done that in a while. Andrew lets her know that her job right now is to connect with her baby and her man. They then start having that uncomfortable conversation about sex. You know, the conversation that you have with someone you've known for all of, 15 minutes. But Sherry's message is that if you're not having an orgasm, your breast milk probably isn't doing it for your baby's brain. So when Love gets home and puts Henry down, she starts trying to make the moves on Joe. Maybe get back in the saddle a little bit. Problem is, Joe is deep into that book, and he's more inclined to pick F. Scott Fitzgerald than the woman he thinks is a complete psycho. And at this point, Love can sense it. She asks Joe, why don't we ever talk? Why don't we ever talk? You always seem really distracted. What are you hiding from me? What aren't you telling me? Joe doesn't have a chance to actually answer the question because Henry starts crying, and Love pops up to go get him. Right before she goes up the stairs, she says, I'm going to take him to his grandmom's. Just enjoy the quiet. So now Joe is home all alone when he gets a phone call from a blocked number. And to his surprise, it's Natalie. Neighbor asks him over to have a drink. So Joe does that. The first question he has, though, is, how did you get my number? But she lets him know, my husband's in tech. Joe kind of thinks, though, it's more of like invasive tech. And Natalie tells him, well, there's no privacy in Madre Linda. I mean, even where we're sitting. She pulls out her phone and shows him that they're under surveillance via cameras. Actually, the place they're sitting is the only place where there's a blind spot. She tells Joe that's why I spend so much time by the pool. But then she shuts the cameras off. She does say, however, that now it'll alert Matthew and he'll wonder why she shut those cameras off. So even when she's not under surveillance, she kind of is. She hates it. She doesn't remember putting a leash around her neck, but yet here she is. They then head inside to get more wine, but when they go to cheers, Natalie's glass ends up breaking and she ends up cutting her hand pretty good. She puts a rag around it, gets it patched up, and then they go to sit on the couch and drink wine. Natalie tells them that feeling that you have when you're with somebody and it's excitement and the possibility of a future, she wishes she could bottle it. She thought it would stay with Matthew, but it kind of just went away. They then get into talking about Joe's relationship with Love, and Joe sort of admits that he's only really with Love because she got pregnant. These are two adults that are admitting to each other that they would love to leave, but they can't for various reasons. Natalie then gets real kinky with Joe. She asks him, do you want to see my reading room? And at this point, Joe is just in love. He can't say yes fast enough. She takes him up to the reading room, which happens to be her bedroom. Her and her husband actually sleep in separate rooms because she has insomnia, and also she's kind of a slob. There's clothes strewn all over the floor, and Joe just happens to pick up her underwear. They then start hooking up, though. She ends up going to unbutton his pants, but then he remembers he's got Love, he's got Henry. He can't be doing this. So he pulls back. Even though he really wants to, he tells Natalie, I'm sorry, I'm just looking for a friend. And then he leaves and goes home. When Love comes home, he says, I just had a drink with a neighbor. You're right. She is weird. They then apologize to each other about yelling earlier. And that's when Joe gets that feeling back that he had for Love. The original feeling, the feeling that Natalie was talking about. And he throws her against the wall, and they end up having post-baby sex. A few days later, they have their first Welcome to the Neighborhood party. It's hosted by Sherry, and it's got pretty much the entire neighborhood there. Both Joe and Love are dreading it, but they already did their research. They hopped on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, all of that. So they're not going into this thing blind. They know about all of these people. As Joe starts walking around the room, he's pretty judgmental. He knows that Sherry had to apologize because she had a secret party a couple months ago after reportedly she got a secret vaccine. It was supposed to be for the Queen of England. Ended up being for Queen Sherry. Word got out. She had to apologize. These people are not Joe Goldberg's people, but he's willing to put on a strong face and just fake it till you make it. They go out to the lawn and they start doing reconnaissance, noticing the people that they saw on the internet. Love points out Kiki and her husband Brandon. Then she sees Andrew and his lawyer husband Jackson. But then Sherry comes over and takes Love away, showing her around the place. And Sherry's husband comes over and introduces himself to Joe. This guy is a 2021 douchebag, talking about diets and different kinds of diets and Joe's metabolism. I don't know. It's weird. He kind of is flirting with Joe, and Joe picks it up. But as Joe is talking to Carrie, Sherry has taken Love over, where her, Kiki, and Andrew are just standing there drinking wine when Natalie and Matthew walk through the door. They fill Love in on that marriage. They tell her that Matthew used to have a wife, Mimi, who everybody loved, but then this harlequin named Natalie came out of nowhere and stole him from her. He ended up dropping Mimi for Natalie, and they're pretty sure that Natalie cheats on him. They figure it's good to tell Love since she lives right next door to her. They're pretty judgmental of Natalie, but Love isn't willing to judge her just because of the hearsay. Later on in the party, though, as Love is grabbing some food, she overhears Sherry talking to a couple of the other girls. She did some digging and she found out all about Love, about her family. She calls 40 a crackhead and says that Love is living off Daddy's money, not working like the rest of them. Sherry's two-faced attitude really hits Love hard, but she wasn't the only person who overheard this. Natalie did as well. And Natalie takes her to the side and says, "Don't worry about them." She tells her that Sherry is a terrible person, but unfortunately she runs this town, so you can't get too righteous with it. The best course of action is to gain her respect, and you do that by being authentic. It'll scare her. Problem is, Love, after having the baby, doesn't really know who she is anymore. And Natalie asks her, if you could do anything, what would it be? And Love tells her that she would open up a bakery. And since Natalie is a real estate agent, she has the perfect location. She gives Love her card and says, "Call me." And then she comments on how she can't believe that her and Matthew haven't had Love and Joe over. And Love doesn't say anything, but she knows that's a lie because Joe told her that he went over and had a drink with her. So after the party, Love yells at Joe because she thinks she's cheating on her. She finds it really odd that after Joe came home from being at her place, that's when they finally had sex for the first time in months. And Joe admits that he did like that she flirted, but it's nothing more than a simple fantasy. They continue to fight a little bit, but the big question that Love has is, are you obsessed with her? And to that, Joe says no. A lot of this argument, though, stems from Love's insecurities about being a mother, and Joe has to reassure her, you're a great mom. But it's not just Love being insecure. Joe feels like he has no connection to Henry whatsoever. So the next day, he decides to take Henry out and bond with him, taking him to the library, reading him some stories, and it works. They have a little bit of a heart-to-heart, as much as you can with a baby, and it seems like they're on the same page. But as they were out, Love went down to the basement and started looking at her old cooking supplies, but she dropped something and saw that one of the air vents was ajar, and when she looked in it, she found a box, similar to the box she found that was filled with her possessions. But this time, it's not her possessions, it's Natalie's. It's the underwear, it's the bloody rag, it's another kind of bloody item. It's really gross stuff. But Love now knows that Joe is in fact obsessed. So she calls up Natalie and doesn't accuse her of anything, but asks to see the space for the bakery. Natalie shows it off to her. It's perfect. There's even equipment there. Natalie wants her to sign a 3-year lease on the spot. But that's when Love asks to see the basement. And when they walk into the walk-in freezer, Love attacks her with an axe. She then calls Joe, who is just leaving the library with Henry, and immediately Joe knows something is wrong. She tells him on the phone, "I think we need to go to couples therapy," as Natalie is lying there in a pool of her own blood. Thank you so much for checking out this recap. Please consider subscribing to the channel. Hit thumbs up if you liked it. Smash that thumbs down button if you thought this sucked. Make sure to be nice in the comment section. If you don't see the next video up in the end screen there, I'll get it up in a few days, not to worry. And I have merchandise, so go buy a mug or something. It's never too early to think about Christmas gifts, folks. But once again, thank you for checking out this recap.